We had negative growth in the first quarter and the second quarter of 2022. Two back-to-back quarters of declining GDP meets the kind of rule of thumb definition of a recession. Nobody wants to use the R word. They're all hiding behind the National Bureau of Economic Research, which is the official arbiter of recessions and recoveries. We'll see what they say. Typically, the National Bureau of Economic Research declares a recession after it's already over. It's like, thanks, we've been through it. Thanks for letting us know we just had a recession. They'll probably come out and say something next year. Who knows? But if it was a recession, it kind of looks like one. It was very mild. Growth in the third quarter was a lot stronger, 2.6%. But when you dissect that, what you see is that was almost 100% driven by net exports. That's typically a drag on growth, and been running trade deficits forever. When was the last time the United States had positive GDP driven by net exports? Probably 1959. That meant that people have a slowdown. Consumption was weak, private investment was weak, inventories were weak. Those are the real drivers of the economy, and they were all weak. So, okay, net exports, that's not sustainable. So I would look for a recession, a more severe recession to begin in the fourth quarter. That's one, combined with Fed tightening, interest rate hikes, balance sheet reductions, et cetera. That's one whole vector, and I wouldn't put any weight on a low unemployment rate. It ignores labor force participation rate, which is awful. It's down around 62% versus 70% in the year 2000. The thing about labor force participation is a very simple calculation. You say how many people are working, that's the numerator, and how big is the labor force, that's the denominator. That's all it is. Now, it's never 100%, right? Because there are students and homemakers and retirees and others. There are good reasons for some people not to be in the workforce at any given time. But as recently as 2000, that number was 70%. What drove it between approximately 1975 and 2000 was basically women entering the workforce. Women who had been home, as homemakers or performing other roles, entered the workforce, and then that number went up. So like I said, it's never 100, but 70 was very strong. 62 is down a lot. I mean, that's about a 14% decline. Look, GDP, the standard definition is, it's consumption plus investment plus net exports plus, government expenditure, like a four-part thing. Yeah, but there's a simpler way to do it, which is how many people are working, how productive are they? Who's working and how productive are they? That equals nominal GDP. And if you have fewer people working, the economy is going to shrink unless productivity is going up, which it's not. And so this is one of the major headwinds. Now, there are some early retirees. There were a lot of people who stayed home, obviously, during COVID. It's very well studied and clear that working is a habit, it's a good habit, I think, for the most part, but it's like any habit. Once you break it, it's hard to go back. So once you get used to not working or working from home or just staying home, it's hard to go back. The government was handing out checks, beginning with Trump in, I believe it was June 2020. Everybody got that one was a $1,400 check. And then in December 2020, at the end of the Trump administration, everybody got a $600 check. And Biden comes in February 2021, not to be outdone. He hands out, I think, a $1,600 check. So everybody got a check, like two or three of them. And a lot of younger people opened accounts on Robinhood and started trading Bitcoin. That didn't work out too well. But a lot of people saved the money. But there were very definite spikes in retail sales coming within 30 days of the checks. Well, that's not surprising. I give people free money, they'll go buy stuff. And that kind of kept the economy going. It wasn't a real boom, but we're not doing that anymore. There's no more checks. And so you had a lot of people who lost the habit, a lot of people staying home, watching, maybe the World Series or whatever, eating Doritos, but they're not working. A lot of people out of the habit, but they just got used to government handouts. Not everybody, but some. The other problem is, because people say, wait a second, how can you have low labor force participation when everywhere you look, there are help wanted signs, which there are. McDonald's is paying $35,000 for an entry level like cashier or hamburger maker with benefits, training, and advancement. Well, that's pretty good for, a entry level hamburger person. And people call this a labor shortage. There isn't actually a labor shortage because we just talked about how you've got perhaps as many as 10 million people between the ages of 25 and 54 who are sitting home. But the problem from the employer's point of view, there's a shortage of willing workers, not workers, but willing workers. Well, what makes you willing to work? Well, a raise, a good pay is one. As employers can't afford to pay the clearing wage to get people off the couch because they'll go bankrupt themselves. They're working on very small margins. sales are declining, et cetera. So I'll pay as much as I can to get the workers, but it's not enough to get this person off the couch, so to speak. And so you've got this really weird situation. I use weird in the technical sense, where you have a huge pool of able-bodied, potential workers, but a shortage of willing workers because you can't pay a clearing wage. But that's more a reflection of how stressed businesses and how low margins are. And then you look at the big names. I mean, I guess Twitter is the most recent, but Amazon, FedEx, Target, they're all looking at big layoffs. Big layoff announcements coming every day. So, but none of which is good for the U.S. economy. But the Fed looks at unemployment. I mean, I look at it because you're supposed to know what it is. I mean, I always say, if you're trying to forecast the Fed, you got to look at the world the way they do, even if it's messed up. Like even if they're looking at the wrong things, which they are. As an analyst, you have to look at them to figure out what they're doing. That's how you do intelligence work. Think like the other guy. But then once I take my Fed hat off and say, well, what do I think? The unemployment rate's almost irrelevant. First, that's a lagging indicator. Secondly, it ignores what we talked about with labor force participation. There is no Phillips curve. I mean, you can draw one. Last time I saw a Phillips curve was flat. Well, where I went to school, curves weren't flat. But they're just looking at the wrong indicators. I don't know what the recession is the cure for. It's coming. I mean, the recession is coming. But and Jay Powell said this. I mean, Jay Powell gave two speeches, August 26th at Jackson Hole and September 21st at the press conference after the FOMC meeting that day. And the September 21st speech was almost like, well, just in case you weren't listening to me in Jackson Hole, let me tell you again what's happening. And then Jackson Hole, he was like Nancy Pelosi. He tore up a speech and wrote a new one, like literally the day before. It was 3 or 4 pages. It was really short. He used the word pain 3 times in one paragraph. I've been following Fed news for 45 years. I've never seen the word pain ever. But he basically said the same thing. But September 21st, he was even more blunt. He said, there's going to be a recession. It's going to be bad. Unemployment is going to go up. Get it straight. These things are going to happen. And that's what it's going to take to get inflation under control. But he went on and on about how inflation was job one, because the Fed has this dual mandate, which never made sense, but it's the law. I mean, Humphrey Hawkins. So the dual mandate is price stability and low unemployment. Okay. Those two things don't always go together. And sometimes you got to make trade-offs between the two. But right now, the trade-off is very easy, which is unemployment's really low. Now, I don't put much weight on it, but the Fed does. Again, put your Fed hat on. Unemployment's really low. If unemployment went from 3.5, 3.6 at the moment, if it went to 4.5, 4.9, is that the end of the world? Well, that was considered pretty low in 2013 when they were doing QE4 or whatever. So they're willing to do that. It's like I remember in Vietnam, the old saying, we had to destroy the village to save it. We have to destroy the economy to save it. Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett have $130 billion in cash. They see what I see, and they're ready because the stock market's going to crash. I mean, just take everything we're saying, recession, higher unemployment, lower margins, supply chain disruption, et cetera, energy disruptions, shutting down, that's going to destroy corporate profits. That's in the cards. It doesn't mean the end of the world. It means you go shopping and pick up some bargains, but not yet.